The room was silent except for the sound of my own breathing. I could hear my heartbeat pounding inside my chest as if it wanted to break free. My husband, Daniel, stood in front of me with his hands shaking, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion, pain, and betrayal. I had just confessed something that shattered the man who had loved me unconditionally for years. My secret was no longer hidden. The truth of my betrayal was now standing in the middle of our living room like a storm that had torn through everything we had built. I remember falling to my knees, crying out, not even sure if I was crying to him or to God. Friends, that moment was the darkest moment of my life. The very thing I thought would give me pleasure, the secret that I thought I could control, became the chains that dragged me down into despair. But it was in that pit of pain that I discovered something about God's mercy that I had never truly understood before. Before I continue, let me pause to appreciate all of you who have subscribed to this channel. You are the reason I keep pouring my heart into these stories. To every new viewer, thank you for clicking in today. If you have not subscribed yet, I cannot wait for you to hit that button because it serves as the fuel and energy that keeps powering this channel. Do not forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words encourage not just me, but thousands of others who may be walking through their own storms. My name is Sarah. I am a 36-year-old woman living in suburban Texas. On the surface, I had what most people would call the perfect life. Daniel, my husband, worked hard to provide for us. We had 2 beautiful children, a comfortable home, and a reputation in our community as a family that seemed to have it all together. I was even active in church, singing in the choir and volunteering for events. But behind that smile I wore on Sundays, my soul was bleeding. It started small. Loneliness had crept into my marriage without me even noticing. Daniel worked long hours, and I felt invisible. Instead of speaking up, I let bitterness grow inside of me. When attention from another man entered my life, subtle at first, then intoxicating, I welcomed it instead of resisting it. What started as harmless compliments turned into late-night messages. What turned into just coffee became something more. I remember telling myself that I deserved to feel wanted. That God would understand my needs. That it was not really that serious. Those lies became the whispers that led me down a road I never thought I would walk. And before long, I found myself entangled in an affair. The irony is that while my heart was chasing sin, I still showed up to church. I still sang hymns. I still bowed my head in prayer. But my soul knew I was far from God. The guilt was heavy, but the temporary thrill was louder. That cycle continued until one evening Daniel found a message on my phone that I had carelessly forgotten to delete. That moment became the beginning of the storm. Daniel's face when he confronted me is something I will never forget. He looked like a man who had been robbed of oxygen. The strength drained from him, and tears filled his eyes. I saw the man who had promised to protect me stand there unprotected from the pain I had caused. My children were asleep in their rooms, unaware that their mother had just detonated a bomb inside the family they trusted. I wanted to take it all back. I wanted to erase every message, every meeting, every kiss. But sin never lets you walk away without consequence. In that moment, the devil whispered to me that my marriage was over. That God would never forgive me. That my children would hate me if they knew. But as I sank into despair, something inside me cried out to God, not with polished words, but with the raw scream of a broken heart. I remember whispering, God, if you can still hear me, please do not let this be the end of me. The days that followed were filled with silence, distance, and a pain so heavy that I wondered if I could survive it. Daniel barely spoke to me. I tried to reach for him, but his body stiffened when I touched him. He would come home late, sleep on the couch, and avoid eye contact. I could not blame him. Trust is fragile, and I had shattered it into pieces. But here is the thing, even in the silence, God was speaking. Every time I opened my Bible, I stumbled upon verses about forgiveness, mercy, and restoration. It was as if God was reminding me that my sin did not erase his love for me. One verse in particular burned into my heart, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness, 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9. I realized then that the same God who had seen me fall was the God who could lift me up again. But I had to surrender completely. I had to stop trying to control my image and start confessing my sin before Him with honesty. One Sunday morning, I went to church alone. I stood in the back pew, my heart pounding, and when the worship team began to sing, "Lord, I Need You," I broke. Tears streamed down my face as I lifted my hands and cried, "God, I need You more than ever. I cannot fix my marriage. I cannot undo what I have done. But I give You my life." It was in that surrender that something shifted. I felt peace, not because my situation changed, but because I finally stopped fighting God. I realized that even if Daniel never forgave me, even if my marriage ended, I would still have God. And He would still have a purpose for my pain. But God was not finished with my story. Daniel, despite his brokenness, began to pray again. He later told me that he would sit in his car after work and cry out to God, asking for strength. Slowly, by the grace of God, our conversations began again. They were not easy. They were filled with raw honesty, tears, and even anger. But they were real. And for the first time in years, we began to rebuild, not on lies, not on pride, but on truth. Looking back now, I see that my deepest failure became the place where God revealed His deepest mercy. The affair that once threatened to destroy me became the very testimony I now share with others who feel trapped in sin. Pain became purpose. Brokenness became beauty. Friend, maybe you are listening right now and you feel that your life is too far gone. Maybe you are in the middle of your own storm, drowning in guilt, shame, or regret. Let my story be a reminder: no sin is greater than God's grace. No mistake is stronger than His mercy. I stand today not as a woman who never fell, but as a woman who was picked up by the hand of God when I had no strength left to stand. And if He can do it for me, He can do it for you. The first weeks after my confession felt like living in the middle of an earthquake. Nothing was stable. Every word, every silence, every glance between Daniel and me was heavy with the weight of what I had done. I would watch him from across the room, his eyes staring at the television, but I knew his thoughts were somewhere else. Somewhere darker. Somewhere filled with questions I could not answer and wounds I could not heal. He had always been my safe place, my anchor, and now I had become the storm that shattered him. I remember one night vividly. He came home from work, dropped his keys on the counter, and sat down at the table without a word. I set a plate of food in front of him, but he did not touch it. The silence was unbearable, so I whispered, "Daniel, I am so sorry." His eyes lifted slowly to meet mine, and what I saw there broke me all over again. It was not anger. It was not hatred. It was pain, raw, silent pain. He finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "Sarah, do you realize you did not just betray me? You betrayed God. You betrayed the vows we made. You betrayed the family we built. How am I supposed to look at you the same way again?" I had no defense. No excuse. Only tears. The days stretched into weeks, and though we shared the same house, it felt like we lived in separate worlds. He slept on the couch most nights. When he did climb into bed beside me, the distance between us was not measured in inches, but in trust broken and love wounded. But here is the thing about God: He does His deepest work in the silence. Every night, after Daniel fell asleep, would kneel beside the bed and pray. At first, my prayers were desperate pleas: "God, please make him love me again. Please make him forgive me." But over time, my prayers shifted. They became less about changing Daniel and more about changing me. God, strip away my pride. Heal the selfishness inside of me. Make me a woman worthy of love again. And slowly, God began to peel away the layers of my heart. One Sunday afternoon, I was sitting in church when the pastor preached from Hosea, the story of a prophet who married a woman that betrayed him, yet God commanded him to love her again as a picture of His relentless love for Israel. My chest tightened as the pastor's words echoed in the sanctuary: God does not love us because we deserve it. He loves us because He is love. I thought about Daniel. He did not deserve this pain, yet here he was, still under the same roof, still providing for our children, still wrestling in silence instead of abandoning us altogether. His presence, even in anger, was a picture of God's undeserved mercy. But the road to reconciliation was not smooth. There were nights when Daniel exploded in anger. Once, he slammed his fist against the table and shouted, "Was he better than me? Was it worth it?" I could not even answer. The shame was too heavy. My silence, though meant to protect him, only deepened his wounds. There were mornings when I would pack the kids' lunches, and I would catch him staring at me with eyes full of questions he did not voice. He was torn between love and betrayal, between staying and leaving. I feared every day that he would finally decide he had had enough. That I would come home to find his closet empty and a note on the kitchen counter. But through it all, he stayed. Not because he had forgiven me, but because he was holding on, barely, to the God who had once united us. One evening, weeks after the explosion of truth, Daniel finally broke his silence in a way I did not expect. He sat across from me at the dining table, his hands trembling as he spoke. "I do not know if I can ever trust you again," he said. "But I also know that God has not released me from this marriage. I made vows before him, and even though you broke them, I cannot walk away without his direction." Those words pierced me. Not because they were filled with hope, but because they revealed the depth of his battle. He was not staying for me. He was staying out of obedience to God. And somehow, that truth humbled me more than anything else could. The real turning point came one night when our children asked an innocent question. "Mommy, why does Daddy sleep on the couch?" The words stopped me cold. I looked into their innocent faces and realized that my sin was not just between me and Daniel. It was spilling into the lives of the two little souls God had entrusted to us. That night, after tucking them into bed, I went into the living room where Daniel was lying on the couch. With tears streaming down my face, I whispered, "I know I do not deserve it, but please do not let my sin destroy our children's future. Please fight for us. Not for me, but for them. For the God who put us together." For the first time in weeks, Daniel reached for my hand. His grip was weak, hesitant, but it was there. That small gesture was like a spark of hope in the middle of our ashes. The journey after that was not quick. It was not clean. It was messy, painful, and filled with setbacks. We went to counseling. We prayed together awkwardly at first. We opened up about wounds we had never addressed even before the affair. It was like rebuilding a house, brick by brick, with our bare hands. And through it all, I kept returning to God's word. Every verse about forgiveness, mercy, and new beginnings became the bricks of my own healing. I learned that reconciliation is not about forgetting the past, but about allowing God to redeem it. Looking back now, I see that pain was the very tool God used to strip us down and rebuild us. My betrayal became the fire that burned away our pride, our distance, and our false sense of security. It forced us to cling to God in ways we never had before. Daniel did not forgive me overnight. Trust did not return easily. But slowly, day by day, God's grace began to fill the cracks. Friend, maybe you are in that same place. Maybe you have broken trust or had trust broken in your own life. Maybe your marriage feels like it is hanging by a thread. Let me remind you of this: God can take the shattered pieces and create something more beautiful than you ever imagined. It will not be easy. It will not be quick. But if you place your pain in His hands, He can turn it into purpose. And that is what I began to see, not just a broken marriage, but the foundation of a testimony that could give hope to others walking through darkness. I never thought the day would come when laughter would return to our home. For months, our walls had been filled with silence, anger, and whispered prayers. But slowly, like dawn breaking after a long, dark night, light began to seep in. The journey was not sudden. Healing was not a single conversation or a dramatic moment of forgiveness. It was in the small things. Daniel choosing to sit beside me on the couch again. His hand brushing against mine while passing the salt at dinner. The way his eyes, once clouded with pain, began to soften. But even with those small glimmers of hope, the road remained steep. There were days when old wounds reopened. When a certain look or a simple phrase triggered the memory of betrayal, and the air between us thickened with unspoken pain. I learned quickly that healing is not linear. It is a dance of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And yet, through it all, God was there. One morning, as I was reading my Bible, I came across 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." I paused and let those words sink deep. My weakness had been exposed to the world, my selfishness, my lust, my betrayal. But in that very weakness, God was offering strength. It was as if he was saying, "Sarah, your failure does not disqualify you. It becomes the stage where my power shines brightest." That realization changed me. Instead of drowning in shame, I began to see my story as a testimony in the making. Daniel and I eventually agreed to attend a marriage retreat organized by our church. To be honest, I dreaded it. I feared being surrounded by couples who looked perfect, who would look at us with pity or judgment if they knew the truth. But what we found there was different. On the second night, we sat in a circle with other couples, each sharing their struggles. Some were battling addiction. Some were grieving miscarriages. And then one couple bravely confessed an affair that nearly ended their marriage. I sat frozen as I listened. Their words mirrored ours, the pain, the broken trust, the sleepless nights. Yet here they were, smiling, holding hands, testifying that God had restored them. For the first time, I realized we were not alone. Our scars were not unique. And if God could redeem them, he could redeem us too. But redemption required honesty. After the retreat, Daniel and I made a pact: no more secrets. No more avoiding the hard conversations. One night, sitting at the kitchen table, I finally spoke the words I had been avoiding. "I need you to know, Daniel," I whispered, tears streaming down my face, "that I do not expect you to ever forget what I did. I do not expect you to just erase the past. But I am asking you to walk forward with me, step by step, as God writes a new story for us. I am asking for your hand, not because I deserve it, but because I want to spend the rest of my life proving that love can be redeemed." Daniel looked at me for what felt like an eternity. His jaw clenched. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears. And then, slowly, he reached across the table and took my hand. His voice was steady, though trembling. "I cannot promise it will be easy. But I can promise this: I will not give up on us. Not because I am strong, but because God is strong in me." In that moment, something shifted. The chains of shame that had bound me for so long began to break. I realized forgiveness was not about erasing the past but about choosing every day to move forward in faith. The months that followed became a season of rebuilding. We set new boundaries: open communication, accountability partners, shared devotionals. We prayed together every night, even when the words felt forced. At first, our prayers were short and awkward. But as time went on, they grew longer, deeper, more heartfelt. Daniel would pray over me, asking God to heal my heart and give me strength to resist temptation. I would pray over him, asking God to mend the wounds I had caused and restore his trust. And somewhere in those prayers, love began to bloom again. Not the shallow love we once had, built on routine and comfort, but a deeper, richer love forged in fire. 1 year after the affair, our pastor asked us to share our testimony at church. My first instinct was fear. What will people think? What if they judge us? But Daniel squeezed my hand and said, "Sarah, maybe our pain is meant to help someone else." So, trembling, we stood before our congregation and told the truth. We shared the betrayal, the brokenness, the near collapse of our marriage. And then we shared the miracle of God's grace. When we finished, the sanctuary was silent. Then, slowly, people began to stand, clapping, some even crying. Afterward, couples approached us with their own confessions, hidden struggles, silent battles. They told us our story gave them hope. In that moment, I understood something profound. My greatest shame had become my greatest ministry. The very thing I wished I could erase had become the platform for God's power to shine. Today, when I look at Daniel, I do not just see my husband. I see a man who chose faith over bitterness. A man who showed me what God's mercy looks like in flesh and blood. And when I look in the mirror, I no longer see a woman defined by failure. I see a woman redeemed, a woman called, a woman whose scars now speak of healing. Friend, if you are listening to this and you feel buried in guilt, shame, or heartbreak, let me remind you, God can take the ugliest parts of your story and use them to write something beautiful. Your pain is not wasted. It can become the very purpose that lifts someone else out of despair. The road will not be easy. There will be tears, setbacks, and battles. But do not give up. Do not believe the lie that your story is over. Because with God, every ending is just the beginning of something greater. So, here I am, once the woman who betrayed, now the woman who testifies. Not because I am strong, but because God is faithful. And that is the day I learned that pain can become purpose.